Good morning. My name is Robin Muherjee. I'm a student in the School of Philosophy and Economic Science, and I'm delighted this morning to introduce a fellow student whom you can see here, Armelle Young, who has made, or I should say is making, a study of the writer and philosopher Simone Weil, a subject about which I don't know a lot. So it's really nice to have you here, Armelle. And could we start maybe with you just telling us why you became interested in Simone Weil, and also a little bit about her life in broad
Well,
terms.
yes. So, the first time I came across her is via a book which was entitled The Shock, Simone Weil. So, to give you a feel for this and how the book starts, it says, "You don't emerge unscathed from an encounter with Simone Weil. You take the risk of exposing yourself to the storm zone. You come out of it either shattered or renewed." So you can see after this, it was difficult not to continue reading. She's a fascinating and complex character, French activist, philosopher, mystic, nonconformist, uncompromising defender of intellectual freedom. And she dedicated her life to social justice and education. She's quite recent, born in 1909 in Paris to a Jewish family, but this was an agnostic household. And she died very young in England in 1943. So there you are, there's a picture of her here with the dates. She had a formal education in philosophy at the École Normale Supérieure, so that's a prestigious school in Paris, at the same time as people like Simone de Beauvoir, other well-known philosophers. And then she became a teacher, but she taught on and off throughout the 30s. She took several breaks because of her poor health, but also because she wanted to devote herself to political activism. She was quite involved with Marxism at some stage. But and in addition to this, an important aspect of her life is that she experienced several significant religious revelations, and these impacted her deeply, although these did not stop her from retaining her focus on social and political issues. Now, she was Jewish during the German occupation, so in the end, she had to leave France, emigrating to the United States with her family. But she was not comfortable staying there, away from all the action. So she left for London with the purpose of working with the French movement, the Free French movement, under Charles de Gaulle. And from the UK, she wanted to be sent back to France as a covert agent or maybe a frontline nurse. But eventually, because she was quite ill and she had self-imposed hardships, she died in Kent at just age 34, so very, very young, really.
Very early, yes. So what kind of self-imposed hardships are we talking about here, and why would she do this?
Well, she was well known for her intense asceticism and self-denial. She often neglected her health and she limited her food intake, partly in solidarity with the sufferings of others. And that started very young. She was just 6 when she was abstaining from eating sugar because the soldiers at the front had none. She sent her rations of sugar to them. Another example, later on in the UK, in the sanatorium where she was being treated, despite being very ill, she limited her food intake to what she thought residents in German-occupied France ate. And as a result, it's been said that she may have contributed to her own death. That may sound quite extreme, but she's an exceptional example of philosophy in action. What you believed in, you had to live practically. So, for example, with the rise of fascism, being concerned with issues of oppression and injustice, she had to act. and rather than simply theorize or write about it. So before the Second World War, she enrolled, joining a unit to go and fight it in the Civil War in Spain. So she's quite, she's quite remarkable in that sense. She will have this sense of deep compassion. Her philosophy was not really theoretical. It demanded a very practical and compassionate attentiveness to the sufferings of others. And she says this in particular. She says, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. So she believed that living out one's values required a deep, active engagement with the world and with others.
All right, so attention is particularly important, significant for her. So a little more about that, perhaps?
Yes, yes. But before we move on to the subject of attention, it's to add to her self-imposed hardships and sufferings. It's worth saying that for her, suffering had a profound spiritual significance as a way of, sort of communion with the suffering of others. For her, it could lead to a deeper understanding of the human condition and even to God. But she also recognized the potential of suffering to dehumanize and degrade. In one of her works, it's called Gravity and Grace. In that text, one can really see that she has this strong sense of being drawn to God through suffering. And again, as a practical example, when she was ill, she was refusing medical treatment because she felt that suffering was a necessary part of her spiritual and intellectual journey. But yes, about the subject of attention, it's one of her most influential concepts. She had this compassionate attentiveness to the needs and sufferings of others, but she also presents attentiveness in a number of other contexts. She was a teacher, if you remember, and she had a number of ideas about the teaching of young people. So, for example, she says this about attention. So she says, most often, attention is confused with a kind of muscular effort. If one says to one's pupils, now you must pay attention, one sees them contracting their brows, holding their breath, stiffening their muscles. If after 2 minutes they're asked what they have been paying attention to, they cannot reply. They have been concentrating on nothing. They have not been paying attention. They have been contracting their muscles. So when she talks about attention, she says that proper attention is not what we often think it is. She describes it as a negative emotion. She says attention is an effort, the greatest of all efforts perhaps, but it is a negative effort. For her, attention consists in suspending one's thoughts, leaving one's mind available, empty, permeable to the object, waiting, seeking nothing, just ready to receive the object in its naked truth.
So we're talking about a very spiritual activity, attention as a spiritual form. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Absolutely, yes, certainly. And in fact, she uses attention as a spiritual discipline to reach God. She turns it into an act of pure, selfless love and devotion, making one's thoughts empty, waiting, seeking nothing, just open and ready to receive God. And for her, that's what prayer is. Prayer is not about asking God for favors, but about directing the full power of one's attention towards God. And in fact, the passage we just looked at about pupils contracting their muscles, she has a very specific purpose here, and that's to teach pupils the right type of attention in order to train them on how to use it with God, i.e., on how to pray. The passage has a significant title, Reflections on the Right Use of School Studies with a View to the Love of God. So, attention, with a view to the love of God.
She's often described as a mystic, as I understand it, and people emphasize her teachings with regard to mysticism. But can you say a little bit more about her approach to religion, to religions and religion itself?
Yeah, yes, indeed. Well, she had a very wide interest in religions, especially in the Greek and Egyptian mysteries, Buddhism, Hinduism, especially the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. She learned Sanskrit so that she could read the Bhagavad Gita in the original. And she believed that all these and other traditions had elements of genuine revelation. Her family was Jewish, as we know, although not practicing. But she says that from her earliest childhood, she always had a Christian outlook, taking to heart the idea of loving one's neighbor. And importantly, she had these mystical experiences, and they often came during times of great personal suffering or when she was engaged in profound compassion for others. There is a particular one where she felt this overwhelming sense of a divine presence, and she says this about it. She says, Christ came down and took possession of me. At the time, she was trying to relieve one of her painful headaches. She was reciting a beautiful love poem. And she describes this further. She says, in this sudden possession of me by Christ, neither my senses nor my imagination had any part. I only felt in the midst of my suffering the presence of a love like that which one can read in the smile on a beloved face. Her mystical experiences had a significant impact on her. She began to see herself as having a personal relationship with God and with Christ. But about institutional religions, she remained critical, the Catholic one, for example.
Okay, well, let me ask, what can be said of her legacy and how is she remembered? What's her influence?
Well, it's her religious work that gained the most attention, but her political and social thoughts also influenced the world. A very large number of works have been published about her, and her most notable principles are still studied now. Most of her writings did not attract much attention until after her death. But in the 50s and 1960s, her work became famous in continental Europe and also throughout the English-speaking world. And some thinkers regarded her as a saint and a great spirit. For example, T.S. Eliot, Simone de Beauvoir, people like Albert Camus, Iris Murdoch. They were deeply influenced by her work. But despite gaining recognition and praise, she received criticism from scholars and from important figures, including Leon Trotsky, including Charles de Gaulle. He thought she was crazy, but even he was influenced by her. He repeated some of her sayings for years after her death.
And what about you, Armelle? I mean, what is it? If I can ask this as a question, what do you admire? What would you say you admire most in this amazing person?
Well, one aspect of her personality which really appeals is her truthfulness, her intellectual integrity, the importance of inner consistency, living according to one's principles, and that comes through in lots of different ways in her works and in her life. So, for example, she was deeply engaged with Marxism, but she did not shy away from potentially alienating her comrades about it. In one of her works, it's called Oppression and Liberty. She criticizes it. It's rigid. She compares it to religion, something that demands conformity, something that restricts freedom. Many of her comrades were uncritically aligned with Marxism. Trotsky attacked her ideas, even attacked her personally. And this uncompromising integrity also applies to the spiritual aspect of her nature, because despite deep Christian feelings, she rejected formal membership of the church. And that's because she was very critical of the way Christianity was often associated with power and social institutions. The church did not always reflect the true spirit of Christ, so she rejected baptism because this would mean compromising herself. In another one of her works called Waiting for God, in her spiritual autobiography, she provides a clear rationale for this. And she even said that if being true to herself in this way, if that meant damnation, then she would accept damnation. But on top of this, just to illustrate the level and depth of her integrity, she wanted to make sure that she was not deceiving herself. So she says this: the danger is not lest the soul should doubt whether there is any bread, but lest by a lie it should persuade itself that it's not hungry. She even wanted to face the possibility and danger of self-deception. So being brave enough to confront and question one's beliefs, even if this risks conflict, even if this may cause us to be out of step with our comfort zone, this I admire.
She was certainly a contentious lady. I mean, agree with her or disagree with her, but her ideas are powerful and compelling. Some might say that she took her beliefs to extreme lengths, and I'm thinking of what you said earlier about her self-imposed deprivations. And I would just wonder how you might respond to this critique.
Well, this was driven by a deep love and care for her fellow human beings, especially those who suffered or were oppressed. She had this generosity, this tenacity, this courage that, yes, brought her to extremes. That may sound excessive, but this was also driven by this eagerness to merge with God. And in addition, what's remarkable is that despite all our struggles, our sufferings, the horrors of the war, she saw beauty in many things. She talks a lot about beauty.
And how did she understand beauty? What do we mean by that?
Well, in a deeply philosophical and spiritual sense, as you might expect. For her, this is not just an aesthetic experience. It's a means of connecting with something greater than oneself, a path to truth. She says that we must have faith that the universe is beautiful on all levels. She sees it as a manifestation of divine harmony, a means to glimpse the divine. There are a few things she says about it which are quite beautiful. The beauty of the world is almost the only way by which we can allow God to penetrate us. Beauty captivates the flesh in order to obtain permission to pass right to the soul. So she's a fascinating, extraordinary character with many facets, which all complement and support each other. As was said at the beginning, activist, philosopher, mystic, searching for truth in an absolutely uncompromising manner.
A role model, maybe, in a way?
Not necessarily, perhaps for some of us, but certainly a challenge, a good challenge for anyone.
I think that's right. This has been amazing, Armelle, and it's really opened my eyes, and I do want to take this further. I can't believe she wrote and said so much in such a short life, with an intense existence. For people like me, and anyone out there who wants to start reading, inspired by this talk, where should we start? What would you recommend?
When I started with her book called Gravity and Grace. But it talks a lot about suffering, a lot of bad sins, and so on and so forth. So maybe that's not the best book to start with. Waiting for God would probably be better. because she does explain all the rationale behind her attitudes, behind the way she goes and the way she addresses life in general. So Waiting for God would probably be the book I would start with.
Well, that's a perennial view, isn't it? But as the world gets more complicated, and it is rather complex at the moment in many parts, one has to say that a lot of our other thoughts and writings about how we intersect as human beings has suddenly become relevant. So a lot, I think, to be gleaned from her thoughts. Armelle, I think that brings us to the end of this broadcast. Thank you so much. I mean, that was eye-opening and inspiring. And yeah, I will definitely take this further. I hope our friends around and abroad, enjoyed it too. And we wish you well. Have a very good day, everybody. Philosophy Live is here on Friday mornings for the duration of the term, and we look forward to seeing you here as the term unfolds. Thank you very much, Armelle. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.